All right, hello and welcome everyone to Writers in Our Midst number 27. I'm just going to fold this. Before I pass it over to Erik and our authors for tonight, I just want to start by saying that tonight's event and all of the work that we do at the Port Moody Public Library is held on the unceded traditional territory of the Coquitlam First Nation, which lies within the shared territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Katsi, Musqueam, Kakite, Squamish, and Stolo nations. And I would like to personally thank the Coquitlam First Nation for continuing to live on and care for this land. I'm not going to talk too much. I would just like to welcome everybody here. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I'm going to pass it over to Erik.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And as always, thank you so much for having us at the Port Moody Library. This originally wasn't a Port Moody Library event, but I'm realizing now that this is event number 27. So we're now past, you owned it longer than the original people. So thank you so much. So today we're going to have, I guess, some Halloween fun. Unfortunately, one of our authors couldn't come today, so I nabbed the spot for myself. Took the opportunity for myself. I'm not going to start, though. Margarita asked to go first. So Margarita Escobar enjoys writing women's fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry. In 2023, she published her short story collection, Under a Weeping Willow. She is a former ICU nurse and midwife who has been writing in her native language, Spanish, for as long as she can remember. But nowadays, she writes in English and in Spanish. She lives with her husband in Pitt Meadows, so thank you so much for driving here tonight. Yes. Oh.
No. Sure, this is at the right level. Okay.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you everyone for showing up in a night like this. I'm really grateful to Pomo Library for allow local writers to show their work. Just want to show you my short story collection, Under a Weeping Willow. There are 20 short stories and a novelette, and it's mainly geared to women's issues in all its content. The story I'm going to read tonight is not in this collection, and it's going to be in my next short story collection, probably next year. Fingers crossed. So the story I'm reading tonight is called Beyond Your Gaze. As the dark and menacing storm unfolded, the rain splattered the windows and sounded heavy. The wind roared. My large old house up the hill seemed to shake, anticipating the squall. Lightning flashes came through the frayed curtains of my office and reflected on my bare walls. The light of my bed's lamp flickered. These are the nights when my demons lurk around my brain relentlessly. I remove my glasses and rub my eyes. I was the only doctor in this small town. Being away from larger places, I had to deal with all kinds of sicknesses. I've seen a couple of patients today demanding people wanting me to cure the madness they have been dragging around most of their lives. I'm a doctor, not a magician. I only wanted to sit by the fire, grab the book I was reading, The Mask of the Red Death, and submerge myself into the world of my favorite author. A sudden knock on my door startled me. Who could it be at this time of night? I set down my book and opened the door. Sorry to bother you, doctor, but I need your help. The man's features didn't disturb me. His dilated pupils displayed a certain anguish, and his eyes seemed ready to jump out of their sockets. His dripping raincoat left a puddle on my doorstep. His muddy shoes told me he wasn't coming from his house. Why was he wandering around on a night like this? The man's demeanor intrigued me. I read in his gaze desperation, agony, and a tint of terror. He leaned on the doorway, his forehead against the lintel. What do you want? I asked, standing by the door. Without waiting for an answer, I added, I don't see patients on this type of night. Please, doctor, I have to talk to you tonight. I need to tell you what I did. The man's pleading eyes didn't touch me, but he piqued my curiosity. Come in, but before remove your muddy shoes. The man stood on my cold stone floor. Leave your raincoat on the coat hanger, I said curtly. He dragged his feet, the back hunched, he's carrying a heavy burden. You could sit if you want, I said, pointing to a hard-back chair. Thanks, I prefer to stand, he said. Suit yourself. I sat on my old leather chair behind my desk. He started pacing, running his fingers through his hair. Then I noticed his bloody nails. His trembling, thready voice said, I'll kill her. His whole body shook. His insane stare didn't bother me. I'm used to treating the mentally ill. I felt comfortable among unstable people like myself. Who did you kill? He didn't answer, but I stopped pacing and pressed his hands to his head. Tell me everything, I said. He slumped in a chair. He stumbled over his words. I feel like a storm cloud hovers over my head, casting a shadow over everything in my life. It's like my mind is stuck in a loop of anxious thoughts. His eloquence suggested he wasn't a peasant, but an educated man. Interesting. Suddenly he started wailing, and his shoulders curled over his chest. I didn't say a word. I just waited for him to stop his whimpering. After a couple of minutes, his flat voice said, I killed the woman I loved. A crime of passion. This may be an exacting story. I'm listening, I said, and licked my pipe. His Adam apple moved up and down with his swallows. He was nervous. I didn't care. Sympathy is not my best trait. The man twisted his fingers aimlessly, fighting back a sob. He stilled himself and told me his story. I was sitting on a bench by the riverside, reading my book, when an angelical sound brought me back to reality. The moment I saw the girl, I felt spellbound. He laid a hand over his heart, and after a moment, he continued. While humming, she picked flowers. I couldn't help myself and approached Lara. That was my beloved name. Her beauty and charm were exhilarating, but what grabbed my attention were her enormous eyes. I submerged myself in the ocean blue of her intoxicating gaze. Since that day, I couldn't take her out of my mind. The monk paused and dried his forehead with the sleeve of his shirt. Meanwhile, I took another drag from my pipe. What a pathetic story. It lacks originality, I thought. Listen, I don't have all night. Tell me about the crime. The man continued his tale. Lara and I became lovers. I saw the world through her eyes. I wanted what she wanted. I lived for her. When I woke in the morning, she was my first thought, and I slept with her name on my lips. That was the happiest time of my life. For a fleeting moment, the man's eyes glowed and flashed a sad smile. How pitiful, I thought. I don't feel comfortable talking about love, an overrated feeling. Fine, I said. What next? We were supposed to be happy, but I wasn't. Why was that? I couldn't stand it when people look at her and admire her beauty. A drop of sweat ran down his contorted features. With his hand clenched into fist, he rocked back and forth on his chair. Go on, I said. Lara was oblivious to my suffering. She was aware of her beauty and the desire she awoke in any man who looked at her. She made fun of me, laughing when I begged her to stop flirting all the time. He shivered and covered his face with both hands to drown a sob. I was tired of this man long whimpering, but I said nothing. I couldn't take it any longer, doctor. I had to get rid of my suffering. So I devised a plan. She blinked rapidly. One night I went to her house. As she slept, crept into her room. She woke up and looked at me. Her eyes flickered like the sky before the storm. I didn't give her a chance to react. I grabbed a pillow and pushed it onto her face with a swift movement. She fought me back with all her might, but her effort was useless. I suffocated her. At this point in the story, the man took a deep breath to still himself. Sweat beaded his forehead and blood drained from his face. But he continued. When I removed the pillow, I searched for her eyes, those eyes that had imprisoned my soul since the day I met her. Lovingly, with my hand, I closed them. The cold shock of realization jittered down my spine. I lay by her still warm body and caressing her face, asked her to forgive me. I don't know how long I was by her side. Later, I lifted her to my carriage and drove to the town's dump. He hunched on himself, waiting for my reply. What could I have said? He was a half-witted man who had confessed his crime to me. As I said before, sympathy is not my strong suit, neither is empathy. What do you want from me? I said with a sharp tone. He took a small package from his coat pocket and gave me a bleak, insane smile. I need to ask you for a favor, doctor. He looked straight at me. Where can I get the solution they use in mortuaries to preserve organs? He didn't give me a chance to reply. He opened the small parcel, which displayed a pair of human eyes. My mouth fell open. The tempo of my heartbeat quickened. He added, I wanted to preserve her eyes so that she can keep looking at me. Only me. As he finished his story, I pulled in and slowly took a deep breath. Why should I care about this brainless man? Then I thought, what the heck? I'll give him some of the solutions. I just wanted to go back to reading my book. That's the end. Thank you so much for listening.
That's quite the doctor. Next. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Next up, we have Trevor Atkins. Trevor has written a children's book with his daughter, The King and Queen's Banquet, in 2019, and an historical fictional novel of for middle graders and up, The Day the Pirates Went Mad in 2021, which has a sequel coming out as an ebook in November and a paperback in January. It's out now, isn't it? We're still waiting. Okay. For the last 4 Halloweens, Trevor has written a special spooky flash fiction for subscribers to his newsletter. If you see some of our previous Halloween, I think they're online. You can see Trevor at that time, he dressed completely up. I was actually curious to see what he'd do today. Dressed down today, we have Trevor, who has come here tonight to share his latest with us.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you, Zadie, for the having us here. Like the hosting that we're talking about, everybody's mentioning is very nice to keep coming back every Halloween. Am I getting into the mic enough? Yeah. It's like being in a dentist chair. These are the books that Eric mentioned. This is the Day the Pirates Went Mad, which is my historical fiction. And then this is the book that I wrote with my daughter. It's a 3-act play that we did inspired by a puppet theater that we had came up with, and then thought maybe we should write it down. That was when she was about half her age that she is now. What I wanted to do today was read another one of those flash fictions that I've been doing for the last little while. This is a look at that, and I have a few copies at the back there for anybody who wants to take one home with them. Also, if you subscribe before the end of tomorrow, I will send you an email and you'll be able to see all 4 of them and print your own if you want to. But as Erik mentioned, I dressed down kind of today. So since he also mentioned that there was a bit of maybe spare time in the agenda tonight, I was inspired to write a little thing about my costume. And I read that first. It won't take more than a minute or so. So I was deciding what to wear, and given my main writing, a pirate costume came easily to mind. I don't really have a lot of accessories though, and I really don't like to stand out. So I decided to go with this costume. I'm a Viking pirate. Do you see it? Does it look like a Viking? No? I am. Other Vikings don't seem to like it much either, even though they like many pirating activities. I think it's because they revere Odin and Thor. That's why they don't like me, because I'm kind of opposed to that. After all, I'm a low-key pirate. Okay, good. All right. Okay, so for the real story, after that, we're going to get back into the spooky vibe. I didn't want to talk about pirates today. This is about blood-drinking demons, spirits, and reanimated dead that plague folklore around the world. Some know them as Nosferatu, the Strigoi, Pershaka, Ustrado, Aluka, Morai, Sukayant, and the Bukolak. See, I knew I'd stumble on that one again. Anyway, we know them as vampires, but not all vampires have the same attributes as they did in the past. We sort of have I guess, a paragon of a vampire when we see it in our media and so forth. And that's what this story is about. More of the modern interpretation of the vampire. And the title is Ode to Blood, spelled as in I owe something to somebody. And it's got 3 different voices in it. I'll be changing my voices throughout and see if you can follow along. And I'll take questions at the end if it's not clear. It's better to read it because it's illustrated with little captions and things. I don't know if you see that on the, looks very white from what I'm seeing. All right. Throw more wood on the fire, will you? Can't get rid of this chill. Everything's so damp. Oh, that reminds me. You know that rotten backpack I found in the hollow log at the old campsite we found this morning? Well, while you were out collecting wood, I took a look through it. I'm telling you now, aren't I? Of course, we share and share alike. There's nothing to crow about, though. A couple of musty shirts, a pair of old trousers, a few coins and trinkets. Here, take a look. There's also this book. It's in such bad shape the covers fell off in my hands when I opened it. The pages are all crumbling or stuck together, too. But just past the middle where the writing stops, I could read that last page. See? Sure, I'll read it to you. There's no name or date, just dives right in. It says, I found little in the halls of the ruin, except that one chamber in the south tower. It's preserved like it's still lived in. The carpets were thick, the wax drippings on the candelabras were fresh. The great desk of dark-stained oak was well polished, and the red velvet on the carven chair was soft to the touch. And not a spot of dust. Magic. It must be magic, no doubt. No doubt at all to last all these decades. There were many tomes lining the bookshelves, but because I found it so late in the day, I didn't have time to pick and choose. I just grabbed what I could fit in my sack. They're old. One of the authors has been dead for 300 years. I also took these scraps from the desk. There's some sort of poetry. The first 2 are a touch faded. The ink on the third is sharp and clear, as if it was written the night before. If these dates are to be believed, it was. Even more curious, the hand appears to be the same across all 3, but these writings span almost 5 centuries. The first is titled Blood is Life, October 27, 1382. Jugular throbbing just below the surface marks the delicate throat, red and hot with life. In a bite as intimate as a lover's kiss, sharp teeth pierce the soft flesh, yielding a rush of warm, ferrous fluid. Passion mixes with overwhelming thirst as scarlet sustenance flows into this body, enhancing senses and renewing strength. We succumb willingly together, weak to the glorious drumbeat of life. The second is titled Blood is Death, October 23rd, 1437, 50-something years later. Deceived by relief from the terrible need, the elation, the false ecstasy passes, the horror exposed. Driven mad with the craving to feed, cursed with a hunger beyond all others, absent is love for the vessel. Only irresistible desire for the liquid within, gulping at throats torn savagely open, draining their life, their essence. Purpose and potential stolen, empty flesh is tossed aside. And the third is Blood is All, October 30th, 1858, 400 and something years after the second. Living upon another's death, taking all each may have been to exist one more night, reborn an undying being, playing with the trappings of former life, yearning to truly love, laugh, and live again. Cut off from all people, doomed in the darkness, needing and hovering a shadow, awakening always to an uncontainable hunger, a violation torn from nature, but bound to its rhythms, unceasing. And it goes back to the first person saying, so what do you make of that? Crazy deep stuff. 10 years ago? You're right, it's 10 years ago today. Hey, listen, the wolves are howling again. They're louder than last night. Well, they shouldn't bother us. Besides, tomorrow we'll reach that castle. We'll be safe inside its walls. There's a bit of a wrap up to that. As Erik mentioned as well, I'm having my second book of the Emma Sharp series coming out in November as an ebook, and then before the end of the year as paperback. I keep moving up the date, because why not, right? And I'll be having, like I did for the first one, I'll be having a bit of a what I'm calling a bug hunt, where I release the ebook, and then people who have subscribed will get notified first, and then I'll post it as well. But whoever finds an error in the ebook first will get a prize. And that's my way of getting a little bit of crowdsourced editing, I guess you could say, just at the last second, to see if I made a dumb mistake at the end. But also you get to potentially win some prizes there. So if you want to get involved in that, there's a couple of brochure type things at the back, or you can sign up on the website. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're nicer than me, Trevor. I borrowed your idea of the bug hunt last time for my last book, but I didn't give any prizes. With me. So next up we have Lauren. Lauren Seaton was born in Sydney, Nova Scotia. She and her husband now reside in Maple Ridge, BC. Oh, so she drove in even farther than Margarita. They have 3 sons, 1 grandson, and 2 granddaughters. Lauren is the author of My Life's Journey, a lighthearted collection of life stories, and also a children's book, Little Star. Her books can be found on Amazon.ca in book form or on Kindle. She continues to work on a novel and a memoir.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is my first time reading this out. It's in my recent book, which is My Life's Journey, and it's like you had mentioned, it's just a light-hearted collection of some of my life stories. So the story I'm doing though is a little bit, it's more towards the evening tonight. And it's called The House on the Hill. It was June 1963. At a time, I was in grade 12. and it was provincial exam time. My cousin had asked me to babysit while she and her husband went to the early movie. They had 2 children. The oldest boy was 2 years old, and the youngest little girl was about 4 months old. The house they lived in had belonged to her husband's grandparents and was built at the turn of the century. It was a small story and a half. On the bottom floor, there was just the living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. That's all there was to it. But there was a stairway going up to the second floor. And that's where the 2 bedrooms were. As the grandparents were no longer living in the old house, they gave it to the young couple because they needed to have some place to stay. Both children went upstairs in bed. My friend Sharon lived about a block away, and she came along with me. So as we often studied together during exam time, and we were going over our old exam papers, and we're studying for our history exam the following day. And we were sitting at the kitchen table working on our homework, and when we heard footsteps overhead going across the room, the footsteps crossed the floor and could be heard coming down the stairway. I leaned over in the living room. Like I said, it was a very small area. Leaned over from the kitchen into the living room and said, "Dougie, get in bed. What are you doing out?" And I looked at my friend Sharon and I said, "Sharon, he can't get out of his crib." So I knew there was something wrong. I thought my friend was just as scared as I was. So anyhow, I grabbed her hand and I walked up the stairway with her, hand in hand. Because I said, we've got to check it out, because if anything happens to those kids, I'm responsible and I'll get in trouble. So we did that. We went upstairs, and like I said, it was a very small place. And as you go up the top of the stairs, the closet was here on the right. So I thrust my hand into the closet. All I could see were just clothes. So I thought, nothing there. And I went down, I looked under the bed. Nothing. So I said, okay, we'll check to see what's in the little room, because 2 children were in there. So there was nothing. The 2 kids were still asleep. And we had to. So I said, well, there was nothing but a dresser, a crib, the 2 cribs, and that's all there was in the room. So we went downstairs again. We got downstairs and I looked at my friend and I said, I'm going to call my boyfriend to see if he's home. Maybe he can check things out for us. But I telephoned, he wasn't around. Difficult. Sharon said, well, I'll call Bob, and maybe he will be around. Maybe he'll come over. He wasn't around either. So I said, well, I better go out. I think we better go outside. Maybe someone had come up, went up through the window upstairs. Okay. So Sharon says, okay, I'll go too. So she followed me as we checked out the outside of the house, hand in hand, mind you, because she was just as scared as I was. It was June time, so there was still plenty of light outside. And once again, there was nothing to indicate that anyone had come in through the windows. Finally, we went back outside, back inside, and I put the kettle on for a cup of tea. We calmed down a little and began to study again. And then we heard the footsteps once again. Oh. So Sharon says to me, she says, I know the guy next door. So I'll check to see if he's home. And maybe he'll come down and go down to the basement for us, because we were too scared to even go down the basement. That sounds like a good idea. Neither one of us had gone down the basement, as we were both too scared to even go down there. My friend made the phone call, and the young fella came over and checked the basement downstairs. He checked all through the house. And went through the entire house. Of course, there was nothing. He left. And he came upstairs and he said, look, there's nothing up there. There's nothing upstairs or down. And then he said, okay, well, I'm going. So it was just after 9, and we heard the car pulled into the driveway. And I knew my cousin was very, very nervous. So I cautiously prepared to tell her the story. And as they stepped inside, I looked at her and I said, Doreen, I know that you're nervous, but I have something I have to tell you. So my cousin looked at me and she said, you heard our ghost. You could have knocked me over with a feather. I was that surprised. She told me the first time that they heard the footsteps and experienced the apparition was early one morning. They were both in bed when she heard the footsteps coming up the stairs. She was paralyzed with fear as the apparition rustled the bedclothes next to where she was sleeping. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. Finally, the thing made its way back down the stairs, and she could hear the back door closing. When she told her husband, he didn't believe her. He thought she was just being crazy. But one day he heard the footsteps and he felt its presence. Over the years, they experienced this a number of times and eventually got used to having it around. So it was a friendly ghost, obviously. My cousin asked the neighbors next door if they knew anything of any strange happenings in the house. And they said they had never heard anything about it before. So it remained a secret. Thank you. Yes.
Lauren, I think you know that story so well that you probably didn't read your notes. That was the impression I got. So next we got my friend Samir Karth. So Port Moody author Lozano Gilabert studied and worked as a psychotherapist for nearly 12 years before becoming a writer. Lozano spent many Friday evenings in one of Mexico's main psychiatric hospitals interviewing patients. Some say, including me, his stories are based on what he learned through those interviews. Hi, everyone. So this story is from my first book. It's called Voices from the Dead, and the story is called Neighbors. Everything began with a knock on the door. It was a timid knock, followed by other similar ones in a wall. It was my neighbor. He wasn't old, 50 maybe, European, wrinkles like horse bark, skin the color of anchovies. But when I opened the door on that day, he looked paler than usual. Hello, Mr. Constantinescu, I said. My daughter grabbed my pants from behind and took a peek. She saw who it was and continued playing with my son. What can I do for you? Hello, my mother-in-law came to visit, so we're going to take her on a road trip. We'll be out for a few days. Would you be able to look after a house? He offered me a bunch of keys in a ring. A rabbit's foot was attached to the keychain. Sure, I said, but keep the rabbit's foot. I don't want to steal all your luck. Mr. Constantinescu laughed and waved his hand. Keep it, all beliefs, nothing but mumbo jumbo. Here's the alarm code, he said, and handed me a small note. I'm going to leave it on. The alarm company should be able to turn it off if they need to, but anyway, here it is. As soon as I can take in the note, I saw something behind Mr. Constantinescu. Something that looked like a pile of rags, as high as my elbows. It's hard for me to describe it, but it looked like a round bale of hay with half a dome of rags on top of it. As I stared at it, trying to figure out what it was, a head emerged from the dome of rags and directed its dull eyes towards me. The light gray eyes were human, even if the white part was yellowish.
What I had taken for a dome of rags was a hump. The person's skin was peculiar too. In comparison, my neighbor's skin looked like a newborn's. Mr. Constantinescu must have seen me staring behind him because he turned around. Oh, there she is, he said, my mother-in-law. He made it sound as he was disappointed she was still there. I greeted her just by raising my open hand. I didn't want to shake her hand. I didn't want to touch her. Call me squeamish, racist, whatever, but it wasn't like that. When I was little, my dad made me shake hands with the old ladies at the retirement home. It felt like touching something that's not entirely alive anymore. It was like touching death. Maybe if I held too many old hands, I would catch death and die. His mother-in-law talked rapidly in a language that sounded somewhat Latin, but wasn't Spanish nor Italian. Please forgive her, my neighbor said. She's from Ardela. She only speaks Romanian. Nice to meet you, ma'am, I said. Enjoy your trip. My daughter came from behind me to see who was talking. The old lady took an immediate interest in her, and a squatted, white as bone arm reached out to touch her. My daughter screamed behind me, trying to avoid her. The woman said something in Romanian, and Mr. Constantinescu answered something brief while moving his hands up and down as if playing basketball defense. It seemed to me he was trying to calm her. Pay no attention to my mother-in-law, my neighbor said, but she wants to greet the child. I know children are not used to shaking hands with adults anymore. Just ask her for appearances, will you? I turned around to look for my daughter and found her hiding behind the door. Sweetie, would you mind saying hi to Mr. Constantinescu's mother-in-law? I said. My daughter stood still. After what looked like a significant effort, she peeped from behind the door and shook her head while she looked at the old lady. Does that mean you don't mind? I asked. But then the old lady reached for my daughter again, and my little one rushed into the house screaming. I wasn't going to force her. I wouldn't make my daughter do something that I wasn't willing to do myself. Modern life being what it is, I forgot about having to look after my neighbor's house until one evening my wife called from the stairs. Weren't the neighbors gone? They were, I said. There's a light on. I climbed the stairs to the landing where my wife was looking through the window. The neighbor's curtains were closed, but through a gap I could see the lights inside. Maybe they just left it on. I'm going to take this to the laundry room, my wife said, and walked away. I was returning to my chores when another light came on, this one nearer to the window. The first thought that came into my mind was that they had cut short the vacation and had forgotten to tell us about it. I didn't want to worry my neighbor unnecessarily, so I texted him. How's the vacation going? After a few moments, I got my answer. Great. We're really enjoying ourselves. Thanks for asking. Is everything okay? What could I say? Sure. Keep enjoying. Sleep tight. I called out loud for my wife to hear me. Do you think they left the alarm on? I knew the answer before she said anything. They always left the alarm on. Always. Then both lights went off. The next night, at about the same time, I was going up the stairs when I saw a light illuminating my neighbor's living room. Maybe it was just my imagination, but the gap between the curtains showed me something, and it seemed wider tonight. A few moments afterwards, after the second light turned on again, I saw something like a wig. They must have left the lights connected to a timer, I thought. Then both lights went off at the same time, but the living room wasn't thrown into complete darkness. I could see the flames from the fireplace playing games on the walls. By that light, I saw a mat of hair move through the gap in the curtains. It might have been something or someone squatting as to avoid detection, with only the hair showing. It might have been the mother-in-law, but then again, she was out on vacation. I heard footsteps behind me. It was my wife. They left the fireplace on, she said. That's not safe. We have to turn it off. I knew she was right, but I didn't want to go in there. I'm not sure why. The memory of my dad making me shake hands with the old ladies flashed into my mind. I had a bad feeling. My wife saw me hesitating. You don't have to go if you don't want to. Her words convinced me to go. We checked on our kids before leaving. They were fast asleep. We took a flashlight and a baby monitor we still used. I typed 911 on the phone and placed my thumb over the send button. The way it goes. I nodded and said, ready. I looked on from the phone and saw my wife shaking her head. Okay. We opened the door and the alarm started beeping. I disabled the alarm, shone the flashlight into the room, and saw the red dot on the motion sensor. They were active. If there were anything in here, the sensors would have picked it up. We turned on the lights. Everything looked okay, except that the fireplace was still on. My wife turned it off while I unplugged the lamps that turned on every night, but they weren't attached to a timer. Faulty wiring may start a fire, so I just turn them off. I just unplug them. I look over my wife's shoulder, and through the gaps in the curtains, I could see our house. A shadow was climbing up our staircase. Look, our stairs, I said, turning around. What? And then the baby monitor blared with the cry of my children. We crossed her front yard as fast as we could. I ran up our stairs to her room. She was sitting on the bed, rubbing her teddy bear. Tears streaked down her cheeks.
It was you, Daddy. I saw her. She was you.
She sobbed.
I'm going to be a good girl now, Daddy. Don't let her take me away.
I held her against me and hugged her. You're a good girl, sweetie. No one's going to take you away. I heard my wife closing the door to her son's room. He's okay, she said, and then faced my daughter. Don't worry, sweetie. Nobody was here. It was just a nightmare. I was sure I had seen something. It might have been just a shadow, but I stayed with my daughter all night. I fell asleep hugging her. The next evening, no lights were coming from the neighbor's house. Nothing seemed out of place, so my wife and I decided to have a movie night. Halfway through the movie, we heard a rhythmical creaking coming from the stairs to the upper floor. It sounded as if someone was slowly and silently trying to reach the bedrooms. My wife and I looked at each other and then rushed up the stairs. There she was. We caught the neighbor's mother-in-law as she was touching my daughter's duvet. Ma'am, you've got the wrong house, my wife said, but she kept trying to reach my daughter. I held her by the wrist and my hand went numb. And as I held on, the dark numbness rushed up my arm. My heart skipped a beat, then another one. The edges of my view became blurry, and the room seemed smaller. My peripheral vision shrunk. The darkness reached my shoulder and was released into my chest. I felt it constricting my heart like black, frayed leather strips becoming tighter and tighter. My knee crashed onto the floor as I collapsed. I saw everything lopsided. Through a black tunnel, I tried sucking air to breathe, but I couldn't. My innards were paralyzed. A ringing in my ears blocked all sounds. I had to do something soon or I would die. I called my wife, but emitted no sound. I reached into my pocket for the phone and found the rabbit's foot. As soon as I touched it, the darkness fled. I've just had a heart attack, I thought. Your son-in-law will be here in no time, ma'am, my wife said. But when I looked for the old lady, she wasn't there. Where is she? I asked. Her hands were facing up as if she had been holding something that wasn't there anymore. I don't know, I gasped. Did you see her leave? My wife and I locked eyes. She shook her head. Neither did I. We called the neighbors, but no one answered. I stayed with my kids while my wife went to the neighbor's house. She didn't get past the doorbell. I don't blame her. The next day, I heard the neighbor's garage being opened. I rushed out to meet them. They were dressed in black, and the mother-in-law wasn't anywhere to be seen. She passed away peacefully in her sleep, Mr. Constantinescu said. I'm really sorry for your loss. When did that happen? 2 nights ago. We would have returned yesterday, but the mortician didn't get there on time. I see, I said. Anything happened while we were out? I shook my head as I returned his keys. I've kept the rabbit's food. Thank God.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Leslie unfortunately couldn't make it today, and I made a horrible mistake of slotting myself after you. I don't think I should have. I'm gonna have to do my own bio. So I'm Erik D'Souza. I am the host of Writers in Our Midst. I am the president of the Tri-City Wordsmiths, and I see some of my fellow wordsmiths here today, so thank you for coming. And I'm also the marketing and communications manager for Crime Writers of Canada. I prefer writing crime novels, but my younger self preferred short stories. So the story I'm going to read to you today is probably about 30 years old. I should tell you a couple of things. I'm not a horror writer by any means, but I like something called absurdism. And absurdism is very weird stories, essentially. It's like Kafka and Nikolai Gogol. And it's essentially, if you take normal characters, but you put them in absurd situations, how will they react to it? And that's the short stories that I used to love reading and also loved writing. Two things you need to know about this story. There's a reference, and I almost edited myself, because the first line is a very old lady lived at the end of our street. And I know at the age of 50, a very old lady sounds a little off. But this is from the point of view of somebody who's about 20 years old. And my kids happen to be here today. So if I asked you, what is very old? How old is very old?
90.
How old, Grandma? So what I'm thinking is, in the terms of somebody young, very old can mean probably anybody retired. So I kept it in. The other thing that you need to know is the story takes place in Montreal, where I'm from. The reason I'm telling you this is because it's winter there, and winter is not the same as winter here. So one of the things we used to do when we were young, it would snow, and not snow like we get here, and I'd come home to claim it, it's like up to my boots. Like it would snow overnight and be up to your hip. And we'd all have to go outside, and we'd all have to shovel, and it was like a rite of passage. Like as soon as you're 12, dad bought you a shovel. Boys and girls, we were all out there, and even moms, with the ice picker just jabbing away. And at the same time, too, when there's elderly people in your community, they don't have to ask anybody. We all go out and take turns, and after we shovel our own driveway, we shovel theirs. So that's where the story takes place. This is called A First Fall. A very old lady lived at the end of our street. Whenever it snowed, we would tell her to stay indoors. It's too slippery. Stay inside. But the old rarely listen to the young, and why should they? Well, last week it snowed. Not a lot, but enough to paint the landscape white. Stay indoors, we cried to her as we shoveled our driveways. We all knew that she would come outside and that she'd slip. Sure enough, she appeared outside, shovel in hand, and promptly fell. It was a nasty fall. Her right foot skated out underneath her, and her left leg just collapsed. She fell backwards and hit the back of her head against her top step. Her body exploded into 101 separate pieces, scattering wildly into the pristine snow. A large fraction of her nose made a run for it. Her liver just lazed about and complained. Her index finger pleaded with her brain to wake and regain control. But it was too late for the brain. It had received the brunt of the damage and would never command again. The upper portion of her throat began to cry a piercing howl. Just like that. A few chunks united together and attempted to coax it to stop. They reasoned with the larynx, and when reason failed, They pleaded and begged. The right foot stomped the throat, but it only managed to turn its cries into screams. The chunks gave up and scattered chaotically. And that's when things got really weird. We all stood there in utter horror, yet chained to our curiosity. One by one, we began to fall. First, it was a young boy with red curly hair, followed by a middle-aged man dressed in a blue parka. Each body exploded, much like the old ladies had, 101 pieces. A good dozen of us had fallen when we noticed that similar body parts of separate individuals started to gather together. The liver hung out and complained about the weather and a lackluster performance of the Habs new goalie. The toes formed a union and bullied the belly buttons and the other smaller orifices. A gaggle of elbows got excited and cried out to the elbows of those still standing to join them. When I began to feel my own limbs wanting to break free, I escaped towards the setting sun. I ran as fast as my feet could carry me, happy that they still obeyed the will of my brain. I do not know what happened next. I never returned to the street that I had once lived on. Nor am I optimistic for those who stayed behind. I never once looked back. That's the first of all. Now, maybe this is not Halloweeny. It's a little weird, I grant you that. But it's about why I left Montreal. So there's the symbolism. Like to say, like I ran towards the center, so I ran west. I came to BC. The body's parts fell into 101 pieces. And I don't know how many people know like Quebec history, but Bill 101 was the Quebec language laws that came in around when I was born and enforced throughout the 80s. And we had to vote if we were going to separate or not. So it was a piece of the body trying to separate from the main source. And I kind of thought, well, Quebec kind of looks like an elbow. But it's also because it's like the rest of Canada, the elbow, and then the east. So that was my intent at saying why I left Quebec. Oh, fair. Hat back on. Our host hat back on. It is our tradition to end our night with Gisela. But no matter what the theme is, she always seems to raise her hand and says, I got one of those. It's like your slot is open. We're going to have to come up with something believable. And maybe one day we'll stump her. But until then, Gisela Woldenga is an author and an actress living in Coquitlam. She is the author of numerous short stories, children's stories, poems, and 9 recent fiction novels, and working on number 10. She is a longtime member of the Tri-City Wordsmiths, thank you, and the Port Moody Creative Writing Group when we first met.
Squeeze through here. Just watch the chords. Yeah, I know. So. All right, that's the right height. Yeah. Yeah, okay. All right. All right. Since this is spook time, I thought I'd give you a spooky story. It's one of a few that I bring. I call it Revenge. A rattle on the door startled Ron out of his half sleep. Was it a trick of the weather? The wind was strong enough to rattle the loose board over the door. Ron went downstairs, got a hammer and nails, and opened the front door, expecting a blast of wind. Nothing. It was deadly still outside. He blinked into the darkness. This isn't normal, he thought. He had heard the wind howling before. Ron checked the loose board. It was hanging by one nail. He placed the missing one and added another for good measure. This was folded, remember? No sooner was he sitting in his chair again, when the wind whistled down the chimney, rattling the window, and added a strange singing tone to its noise. He got up and opened the door a crack. No sound, no wind. He slipped on his shoes, took a flashlight, and stepped outside. This I have to investigate, he thought. The moon's silvery light barely illuminated Ron's path. The old oak tree stretched its bare, gnarled branches to the upstairs windows, as if it's trying to get into the house, Ron said to himself. Then he caught a slight breeze. In a second or two, it rose to a blast and lifted him up. He tried frantically to keep his feet on the ground. In vain. The maelstrom of air turned and twisted him around and around. The dizzying spin spiraled Ron higher. He saw the oak tree's big branch whizzing past his head. The upstairs window came closer. He covered his face with his hands. With a crash, he sailed through the splintering glass into the bedroom. He checked himself. Like a miracle, he was not cut. He took a deep breath and looked around. Emily's bedroom. Nothing had been disturbed since her death 5 years ago. She had died quietly, a good way for her and for Ron. Since he'd lived his life peacefully without Emily's constant complaining, demanding voice, day after day. He still congratulated himself for making her last glass of milk into a cocktail of painkillers and sleeping pills. For a cold and a good night's sleep, Ron chuckled. Before ever sleep. His carefully drafted suicide note had even convinced the police and the doctor. What power had blown him into this bedroom? Then Ron remembered. Today was the anniversary of Emily's death. Was her ghost trying to scare him? Why, after 5 years? He turned the doorknob, didn't move. Damn, it's still locked. Ron remembered. Was this Emily's revenge? Out of the window again? No choice. The oak tree was close enough. From there he could climb down. After some effort, he reached the sturdy branch. He searched for a good foothold. Halfway down, something or someone shook him hard. Desperately, he tried to hold on, but felt himself slipping and his fingernails sprayed. The last thing he saw was the pointed end of the oak tree's branch break and rocketing towards him. When the neighbors found him the next morning, they wondered aloud. We thought only vampires were killed this way, with a wooden stake through their hearts.
Wow. I told my kids, don't worry, it'll only be an hour. And it's 8 o'clock. So well done, everybody. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And once again, thank you, Sadie, and the Port Moody Library for having us. We wouldn't do this without you. I'll have to come up with some new themes for 2025. So if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear from it, and we'll see if Gisela can do it. So thank you, everyone.